here and then the first one.
Okay. So
I read this one.
So for those of you who are joining us,
I wrote what possible for each one.
like this is your first time, we've been doing a series of conversations about prayer.
Everything you
kind of been me and
here
Lynette has
goes with
sort of
this
been helping out.
passage right here.
Um,
Nothing from 55 or
and
63.
Having this conversation. Usually we tend to like to have speakers for different conversations, but like different series. But for this conversation, I think we, just because it's more intimate and more about our, very about our spiritual life, the idea was to just keep it in-house. And so, yeah, it was Vocassio's welding teacher used this phrase, and when we were praying together, and I really liked this idea of like listening to God's presence, because usually we think about listening to God's voice, but he used the phrase listening to God's presence, and it made me think a lot. And I thought that we would just talk about prayer less in terms of speaking words, but in terms of like just learning to be with God. And so that's kind of been the general topic when we're talking about prayer these times around. And so like today, I guess we're like a week behind because we went to Michigan, but today we're going to talk about dreams. And let me jump. Oh, next week, I know that we had in our little intro video, we had talked about like maybe we'll share about just some of the questions people have about prayer, like why do we say in Jesus' name, those kinds of things. And so we're going to save those kinds of more Bible-y, theological kinds of questions for next week. And that's going to be a little bit more like involved when it comes to that stuff. But yeah, and some of this stuff is sort of tentative, like the idea of talking about praying in tongues. I asked Amy, she was like, maybe. I thought about maybe we could talk about feast fasting and how that relates to prayer. So, and if other people have other ideas about topics we can talk about, feel free. I mean, none of this is really set in stone. But I'm just going to jump to today. Today, and feel free, by the way, to let me know if something's not working when it comes to this conversation. For some reason, the video screen doesn't pop up on this computer. So, but Lynette and I were kind of talking about prayer actually a couple months ago when we were thinking about the idea of talking about prayer together, and this topic popped up, and yeah, we were like brainstorming it, and I don't know, Lynette, I don't know how you would say it, but how we decided to have this topic as one of the topics we wanted to talk about. I don't know if you remember, Lynette. Feel free to jump in if you remember, but I do know that Marquise has also expressed interest in talking about this topic. Fortunately, he's not here. But yeah, and then also, since that time, since Lynette and I started talking about it months ago, actually it was more than just a couple months ago, it was probably like half a year ago.
Yeah, it was half a year.
And then really it was probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago that Marquise brought it up. But even in all those months, I whenever the topic of dreams, it just, how like you notice something when it's on your mind or it's in the back of your attention. But just I would notice when I read the Bible or when just life, I would notice that topic much more often. It just came to my mind a lot more. So yeah, dreams, right? I mean, I think this is like an interesting topic because yeah, it's just, I guess it can also be a little controversial, but it's also a little mysterious. And part of what I want to do today is I want to share a little bit and have us discuss a little bit, but also I want to let Lynette share from her own experience. So I want to kind of get past some of my stuff first, and then let Lynette share. So if I'm going too long, we'll just kind of cut it off and let you share, Lynette. Is that okay? Okay, cool. Anybody want to read? Just like jump in and read these verses. They're just kind of random verses that relate to this topic of prayer. Hold on.
I will bless the Lord who has counseled me. Indeed, my mind instructs me in the night. Indeed, God speaks once or twice, yet no one notices it. In a dream, a vision of the night, when sound sleep falls on men, while they slumber in their beds, then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction, that he may turn man aside from his conduct and keep man from pride. Your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams.
Okay. Anyone notice anything from these verses? Just anything in particular? I mean, they're pretty general, but I just included them because they have just a general sense of like God speaking to people through dreams. But this middle one from Job gives this sense. If you know anything about Job, he suffered a lot, right? He basically suffered like crazy, and it was like what's the point, you know? But in the middle of it, it's 33 chapters into this the book where he's like basically crying out to God and crying out like, why, you know? He says that God, he says here, right? God speaks to people. He's trying to get people's attention all the time. He's always trying to get our attention, right? And this whole idea we've been talking about in prayer is that God is always speaking to us, always present to us if we have ways to notice. But here he brings up dreams in the night as one of the ways that God is maybe trying to speak to us. So I found that kind of curious. So let's move forward. But you know, I hope this kind of can orient us a little bit. I really thought this quote that I came across really fascinating. And so this visual is going to kind of help orient us a little bit before we look at scripture passages and stories that have to do with dreams. But actually, maybe Jose, if you're down, do you think you'd be able to read this for us?
Sure. Dreams in the ancient Near East. In the biblical imagination, dreams or altered states of consciousness are an in-between heaven and earth space. It's where you are able to truly encounter reality as it is, aside from all of the conscious ways that we suppress reality and rewrite reality. A disarmed human mind can see reality for what it really is.
Yeah. So I really liked that picture. And actually, I listened to this podcast probably 5 or 6 months ago, right around, Lynette, when we were beginning to talk about dreams. And it was really, really fascinating. I recommend it if I don't know if any of you guys ever listen to podcasts or whatever, but they did a good job with a different series of conversations about like, how did they think about dreams back then, you know? But they use this, you know, I don't know if you've ever seen the Bauer Party videos, but they like to talk about heaven and earth, and they use these circles and talk about like how, you know, heaven, the heavens, the skies, that's God's space, that's up there, you know, and the earth, the land, that's human space, that's down here. And the overlap between those two spaces is what human beings are supposed to be, right? We're supposed to be the image of God. We're supposed to sort of, we're supposed to sort of be this way that God's presence is revealed here on earth, right? But the way they were talking about it in this conversation was that there's a certain sense in which dreams have a unique way in the biblical imagination of how God would sort of like when we have a dream, that's like heaven overlapping earth, right? So I know that sounds a little abstract, but I'm going to try to see if we can zero in on that a little bit, right? So I liked the language they said that dreams or altered states of consciousness are an in-between heaven and earth space, right? So like kind of in that overlap. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this concept of like thin spaces, where it's this idea that like in this place or time, in this moment, like if you think of heaven is we can't see, you know, it's like invisible. The angels, we can't see them. But in this moment, somehow that veil between heaven and earth is lifted. And somehow we get to peer into that reality that we can't necessarily see on a day-to-day basis, right? And so thin places is this concept that I've heard before, where it's basically like that, right? The in-between, like somehow, you know, this place feels like a sacred place, you know? And you can think about places, we're gonna actually look at a scripture passage where Jacob, God shows up to him in a dream, and that place feels like a thin place, right? Like it almost feel like the separation between heaven and earth is just like, you know, it's very, very, it's almost like heaven is made manifest in this moment, in this place, right? So you've also heard of concepts like heaven on earth. You know, another way of looking at it is like, that's kind of what the temple, when the Israelites had the temple, you know, that's what the temple was designed to be, right? A place where God's presence could be experienced. And so if you think about, like literally there would be things like this cloud would show up over the temple to signify that God was present. He was literally there in some way, right? And you think about priests. Priests were these human beings that somehow were supposed to represent God, mediate his presence, right? You know, more in our experience, even another way of thinking about like even just the general topic of prayer is basically the way that we
Portal.
Yeah, it's like the portal. That's a good way of saying it. Yeah, that's how we go to this in between us and God, right? And so today we're talking about dreams and visions. This is kind of like this in between space. And you know, seeing the unseen. I always think about this passage in first. Is it first?
Second Kings.
Second. You know what I'm talking about?
Elijah.
Yeah. You want to share about that passage?
Yeah, my coworker shared about this today in devotions.
Really?
This morning.
It's funny.
I guess Elijah and his friend or servant or something. They're surrounded by an enemy army, and the servant is obviously afraid, feeling anxious, and Elijah, I guess my coworker is sharing from a counseling perspective, like, don't dismiss the fear, but, you know, encourage people to see with new eyes. So Elijah is acknowledging that there is an army, not saying like, oh no, God is bigger, just not dismissing the circumstance, but you know, saying, hey, look again. And then when he looks again, there's an angel army protecting them. So there's a supernatural reality there, or God's reality, where circumstantially it looks like they're gonna die, or there's danger, something causing fear. But when they were able to see what was actually happening, God was protecting them and
Yeah.
working in their yeah.
So I think of the language of seeing the unseen, basically. Like, yeah, you literally, I mean, it required God opening their eyes to see something that you can't see with human eyes. And in that moment, they like God pulled back the curtain a little bit, right? So that you can see, I imagine what that would have looked like. All these armies are in front of you, but then somehow on top of them, you see all these angel armies, whatever that looks like, right? So yeah, I've always been curious, interested in this topic, I guess. I've been drawn to these kind of things, like what people think of as mystical encounters. But just like, whenever someone shares something like that, I always want to say why, not why, but like, tell me more about it, and is that real? What did that look like? What did it feel like? Tell me about how God showed up in your life. You know what I mean? And I just think of those moments as like when the circles sort of overlap. But yeah, I don't know why. I've always been attracted to that. I believe I've had some of my own experiences in that way. But maybe we can share about that a little bit, about our own experiences a little bit later. But before we like actually share our own experiences, I want to actually look at the scriptures. It's always good to ground our thinking and imagination in scriptures. But I just found a picture of, like, I think this is Joseph and an angel. He's supposed to be sleeping here. But I want to see if we can share some dreams and dreamers that we can think of that are recorded in the scriptures. So, like, just collectively come up with a list. And if you know the story, maybe the rest of us don't, so you can share what that story was about.
Joseph, married to Mary, has a dream from an angel or an encounter with an angel. Angel shows up in the dream saying, Joseph, like, Mary's pregnant, but don't let that bother you. There's a bigger purpose, and this baby's name is Jesus.
Like, she's not like it's not a scandalous thing. It's a supernatural thing, right?
Joseph in the Old Testament has a dream about one day I'm going to be respected by my brothers and they're going to bow down for me. And then that gets him in trouble because sounds really annoying. And then
He's kind of bratty, right?
And then when he's in prison, Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, has some dreams, and kind of disturbing, but Joseph is able to interpret them with insight.
Yeah, right.
The movie is Prince of Egypt. So wow.
Yeah, and in that movie, was it Joseph? No, was it Joseph about? Yeah, Joseph was Prince of Egypt. No. Was Joseph Prince of Egypt? No. That's Moses. Joseph,
What was that?
they had a movie like Prince of Egypt. It was called Joseph the Dreamer or something.
Oh,
And it's funny that they named it actually about him as dreamer. Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar has these disturbing dreams, and Daniel is in Babylon interprets it for this.
Which, yeah, if you're connected to Sunday mornings with One Hope, then you will have heard about some of these episodes, right?
I guess like Zechariah has a vision.
Every day the gym,
Yeah, so you made a
Every week, and you're close, as long as they are the smallest and not.
in the
They're
Greek,
the smallest.
like trance. So
Very good
sure.
in the back.
That's above or out of the ordinary. So I think that's generally how people would distinguish between dreams and visions, usually the language, but yeah, similar quality, right? It's like there's something supernatural about
Let's
it.
hear it. No, don't do it. You see, I'm in the middle of doing something, right? I'm not sitting.
Like John the Baptist, where Hannah and Samuel.
Yeah.
Sarah. Isaac.
Oh, my bad.
Um,
I'm just gonna check real quick. Hold on. Oh no. Anybody else have any other dream stories that come to their minds? Lynette or Jose?
Well, one that I've always kind of found pretty interesting, and there's been some cool artwork over the years. Was from Genesis 28, where Jacob he dreamed. I could read it, or just kind of.
Go ahead. Actually, don't read that one yet because we're going to read it.
Yeah, that one's a pretty popular one. So yeah, I'll lay off. I wasn't sure if you were going to have anything specific with it, but
yeah,
it's just typically referred to as Jacob's ladder. So I'll just leave it at that. But that one's that's a fascinating one.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot in the scriptures. What's that?
A lot of the Old Testament prophets like receiving words. Like I don't know if it's like dream state or just.
Yeah.
It seems like, and we'll look at some of those scriptures later. It seems like a lot of the visions or the ways that they may have received a word from the Lord sometimes was through dreams, right? But yeah, I like Jose's talking about Jacob. So we already have Old Testament and New Testament before Jesus and after Jesus, or during Jesus. But these are a couple that I threw up. These are some of the more famous ones in the scriptures. By the way, I included this guy, King Abimelech, and I think on Sunday, Matt has mentioned this too. Not all the people that receive dreams from God necessarily know God. They don't necessarily know Yahweh, right? Or that's the name that God gives the Israelites for him to call him, right? So God can show people dreams that have to do with his guidance, even if you don't know him, which is, I think, really fascinating. And if you look at some of these stories, I don't really find exactly one theme in them. Like the way God guides or the way God communicates through dreams, it's about so many random different kinds of things, right? Jacob, I don't know if you've ever heard this story, Jacob 31 or Genesis 31. Jacob talks about receiving from God through a dream ideas for how to mate his sheep so that they would multiply faster, right? You have dreams that communicate something that's coming in the future. You have dreams that, one of the ones that I really loved a lot when I was a kid was 1 Kings 3. King Solomon, he's known as one of the wisest people, right? But when he was young, God shows up to him in a dream and he says, I'm going to give you any wish. Just let me know what you want. And Solomon asks for wisdom, right? I love that one. And then God actually ends up giving wisdom and fame and wealth and all these other things, kind of as a reward for just asking for that. But yeah, so there's just a lot of different kinds of things that God does through dreams. But I want to maybe jump forward to this. This is the story we want to focus on, right? Lynette, actually, do you want to read this out loud for us? And maybe as Lynette reads, we can just notice, maybe let me just preface this. It's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? The descendants. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, whom God had first showed up to and told him to leave his family and his land. But sometimes we take for granted like that your parents are following God, so you necessarily do. But you get a sense in the story of Genesis that Jacob maybe knows about his dad and their God, Isaac, right? Isaac probably told him all these stories, but Jacob doesn't really personally know him himself yet. And so this story, Jacob is kind of off on his own, traveling around. And this is the episode where he kind of maybe is first encountered by the God of his fathers. Okay. And so try to see what you notice as Lynette reads the story.
Jacob meets Yahweh, Genesis 28:10-22. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of those stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you.
Okay. Keep going.
When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. When Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth.
Nice. So it's a really interesting kind of episode. Jose mentioned that sometimes it's called Jacob's Ladder. More recently, I think a lot of scholars would argue that, because it used to be that people would say he had a dream in which he saw a ladder. But a lot of people would say these days that it's probably more likely that word is a staircase. And we don't have to get into that, but that has to do with kind of the shape that temples back in those days would have had staircases, So it's almost like a vision of a temple, But yeah, did you notice anything about this story that you found interesting?
I like the beginning where he said the angels ascending and descending on it, like when he saw the stairway resting on earth and then the top was heaven. I feel like a lot of times when people picture heaven, they picture like these golden stairs all the way to like this big golden gate and clouds and light and everything. And so that's what I instantly thought of when I was reading that.
Mm.
I always thought it was interesting that the angels were like ascending and descending.
Mm-hmm.
Like, excuse me.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Did they like high five each other as they went by? All right. There was a Jacob's response is could you preface saying how like up until this point, it's mainly his grandfather, father interacting with God. And he kind of says at the beginning of, I don't know what verse it was. Yeah, there where he says, surely the Lord is in this place and I was not aware of it. And and he says he was afraid, which seems to be a pretty common one, right? When people with dreams, like I know later on with Mary, but it's like this fear, which I feel like that makes it a little more realistic, because if you see something like that and it feels like more than just your typical, whatever kind of dream, but there's something a little more to it.
Yeah.
It seems like fear, I think, is an appropriate initial, feeling, reaction. But yet there was, I don't know if it was like, because then he follows up with how awesome is this place. So I mean, it couldn't have been like terror kind of fear, I guess, maybe more a little bit of that, but mixed with awe, kind of. I don't know, or maybe it was like a roller coaster of. But it definitely hit him, because he's like, yeah, I'm aware that this is God, like that He is actually present here.
Yeah. And for me, I noticed that his response is to make a promise, but it's also pretty conditional. It's if you know anything about Jacob's story, he's like this really interesting conniver. So like making a deal with God. God, you got to watch over me. I mean, that initial like, oh, wow, this is kind of scary. Wow, I've been in a place where the God is, and the angels and all that. And suddenly he's comfortable. He's like, okay, now you protect me, you get me back to my family, and then you're going to be my God. At least that's how I'm reading it, in light of Jacob's whole, like his personality. Yeah, it's just, like, I also thought, man, it's interesting, right? God, how often is it that God is in this place and I was not aware of it? And that's the whole idea of like, heaven overlapping earth. When is it that, and for us that know Jesus and we believe that His Spirit is with us, that's all the time, right? We are temples of His Holy Spirit, but we're not always at every moment aware of His presence. And so in some ways, God is trying to show us what we're not aware of, right? And sometimes dreams can be this way that that happens, right? So let me do this. I want to let Lynette share, but before I do that, let me do this. This also, I pulled this out especially partly for Marquise. So Marquise, hopefully you're watching this. And Marquise, if you have questions or pushback, we can dialogue in person too. But prophetic words from God through dreams, right? Amy already kind of pointed this out, right? That it seems like a lot of the prophets, which you think of them as basically a spokesperson for God, that oftentimes God would find this person that, He would speak to His people on His behalf. And oftentimes it was warnings or things that, the whole people needed to hear. So lots of times that has to do with like, you guys are going off in the wrong direction. And sometimes it would be forecasting the future, right? If you walk in this way, these bad things will happen. If you go in this direction, you will have lots of good and happy things, right? But it does seem like in these passages, God speaks through these dreams. So let me just read these for us. It says, God said, "Hear now my words. if there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, shall make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak with him in a dream. Okay. The prophet who has a dream may relate his dream, but let him who has my word speak my word in truth. Right? That's an important distinction, I think. God may give a dream, but make sure that you speak truly. All right? What does straw have in common with grain? Declares the Lord. So, and this is where we're going to get into the territory that I think sometimes is a little debated or makes people uneasy, right? Because once we get into this stuff, you have the reality that, let's be real, right? I mean, anybody can have a dream at night, and it can be about, whatever, like they had, whatever's going on in their life, you know how dreams work. They're always funky, crazy things, right? And then they can claim that God spoke to them, right? And how do we really know, right? I mean, we don't have access to their mind. We don't have access to know for sure. And so you have a bunch of, we don't have to read all these passages, but we have lots of passages. These are all actually from Jeremiah 23 and 29 that try to give some guardrails, okay, for helping us to think about how God does speak to people through dreams. And sometimes those are not just meant for themselves, but they're actually meant to convey messages. But we have to be very careful. So it says, 23, 25, I have heard what the prophets have said who prophesy falsely in my name, saying, I had a dream, So you just imagine like a person claiming to have been a prophet, that God had spoken to them in a dream, and they show up and they want to talk to Israel's king and say, hey, your God Yahweh says this, and God's saying, be very careful. Just because someone claims it doesn't mean that's necessarily true. They may even believe that it was a dream from God, doesn't necessarily mean that it was, right? Let me just jump to maybe the last one here. Behold, I am against those who have prophesied false dreams, declares the Lord, and related to them, and led my people astray by their falsehoods and reckless boasting. Yet I did not send them or command them, nor do they furnish this people the slightest benefit, declares the Lord. Okay. And then you have so many other passages that talk about this. There's even passages that talk about evil spirits showing up in dreams, right? Or giving dreams. So the reality is it's complicated. It's not a black or white thing. And just like anything else, right, that requires then that we exercise wisdom or discernment, right, by the Spirit of God. So I'm just going to skip this one. I mean, the summary of this one is there are wolves in sheep's clothing, and we have to discern the spirits, right? We need to be careful and wise. But just because we need to be careful and wise does not mean that God cannot speak to us in dreams. And so I want to kind of use this as a jumping off point, Lynette, if you're ready, to kind of invite Lynette to share. And this is actually, Lynette has shared with me about some dreams that she believes that God has spoken to her through. And I, in listening to those dreams, have had to also exercise that discernment, right? And it's not a black or white process, but I believe that it indeed could have been God speaking to her, or God showing up in her life in a special way. So I wanted to give you space, Lynette, to share some of that before we open up to the rest of us to kind of share.
Yeah, when we were originally thinking about this series, I feel like this was when it came up, it was just relating to the things that I had that I believe God was speaking to me through. During this time last year, I was just really frustrated with God. I was fed up. I was sick and tired of everything. And kind of, I think almost exactly like Job, I just was like, God, what is happening? Like, can you just answer me? I just really need to know why is all of this happening. And I just felt like I was just in such a dark place where I wasn't like exactly like looking forward to the future. But I still knew that God had something for me. I was like, well, obviously, all of this is like for something. Like being in the hospital, being sick, it's like everything back to back to back. It's just like it was it just felt like a domino effect. Like one little thing started and every other domino fell. Like I just kind of felt like my life was falling apart, which is weird for a 19-year-old to say now looking back at being 20 now that I'm 20. But it's true. You don't expect your life to be crumbling beneath your feet when you're 19 at all. You don't expect to be sick. You don't expect to have your life altered in so many different ways. And I think like God was just, he was there for me throughout the whole time. But sometimes I was just so angry where I couldn't see it. And so when I went to him very humbly, I just was like, this year is almost over. And I'm happy that it's almost over. And so I just asked him, I had so many doubts like all year, all of that year. There was so many things that I doubt, like doctors just telling me so many different things. And so like things like kids, my mom wants me to have kids. And then at the time she was having a new granddaughter with Javerlyn. And so my mom was just like, I want all of you to have kids. And so I was just like, that's going to be hard for me now. And not only that, I just was like, well, I kind of know I kind of have a sense of what I'm called to be. And so I just wanted more insight on that. Um, and just among other things, I was just unsure about. It's just like I was unsure about my health. I was afraid that I had to get a kidney biopsy, which wouldn't be good for me. Um, and like God really spoke to me in so many different ways. And I think the biggest thing that impacted me was that God ensured good health, better health for me. And I think that was the biggest thing is like I was just having so many really bad kidney flare-ups. And the doctors were afraid that they would have to biopsy me, even though with my blood clotting disorder, it wouldn't be possible for me to recover very well. And just being on dialysis at such a young age was scary for doctors. Um, I, it was a rough year. I had each doctor's appointment, even now, each doctor's appointment, like students come in and they research me. There was one appointment where I just had hives all over my body. And it it was like I just felt like a circus animal. There were people taking pictures, and there were about this is obviously before COVID. There were about 30 people in that room examining me, and that really broke my spirit a lot. And so one thing that I just was like really hopeful for was to have better health. At the time, I wasn't taking my medicine. And I had ended up in the hospital, which was the last time I was hospitalized. And the doctors told me I could have died. I had 104, almost 105 fever. And so and although it was so cold, they just had fans on me, and they lowered the heat in the room, and they only had me in the room. And you know, sometimes my twin like talks about it, and when we have like our little heart to hearts every once in a while, and my twin described the way I looked, and my twin was just saying like how pale I looked, how frail I was, and I couldn't walk, I couldn't get up, and it was very hard. And like the doctor that told me that ended up being my rheumatologist, which he went away, but he put me in good hands. But he was just like, you need to take your medicine and do what you need to do, and like work through whatever. Because it was only a common cold, and I still ended up in the hospital, and like it just got out of control with the immunosuppressants and just everything. And so I was really thankful that God really showed me that. And this year, I'm like almost as healthy as a lupus patient can be, which I'm very excited about. My kidneys are doing way better. They have less like proteins in them. Each time I get examined, it's really nice to hear good news after a year of bad news. Not only that, it's like I feel like God was just telling me like that that I will learn to love people better, that I would learn to, I don't know, I guess I just needed some humbling. And I feel like this year I really did, I did execute a lot of the things that God had for me. I think at the time I was lost, I was frustrated, and I wasn't seeing clearly. And so I feel like it was just like a wake-up call. And I really do thank God for it every night when I pray. And I don't think there's ever going to be a time when I doubt God again. I don't ever think that there's going to be a time where I am like frustrated, like unsure to the point where I'm frustrated like that again. And so I'm really thankful and really grateful for that. And especially with like this year being so weird, I just feel like I'm way more closer to people, even though we're supposed to be distant and stuff, which I think is really nice. But yeah, I think those are some of the ways through that time. It was more like, I guess, dreams and visions, and they would happen mostly at night. It was like a whole week straight. I had so much energy and slept like 3 hours a day, and I just thought that was extraordinary. And I couldn't believe my own self. Like I was just, my mom saw everything, and it's like I always talk to her about it. And I just remember like the first night that I finally heard something. I finally heard God. I jumped like with joy. I've never cried tears of joy in my life. I cried tears of joy. I was shaking, like I was ecstatic. Like I was it was I don't even know how to explain it. I was speechless. I didn't know. I was shaking. Like it wasn't like even like a scary shake. It was just like I didn't understand what was happening, and I was finally hearing some things that I had so many doubts about, and it just felt so relieving that my body just started like, I was just happy. And I felt like I never felt pure joy like that ever in my life. And so I thought that those things were really nice, and I will never take God for granted again. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. And I remember when you were sharing in that season about some of your dreams. I mean, I remember you sharing things like, just like, I guess sometimes they're really personal to people, but like I remember you sharing like just these like pictures and these colors and shapes and things like that, and but somehow through it you knew that it was God's, like it wasn't just like any dream, like, you know, you have dreams at night, but that you knew it was some sort of God was present in that dream, right? I don't know. I mean, it's
I know which one you're talking about too.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that one. It's a so I don't know. Actually, I think there was two, but I'm thinking of the flowers that I talked about, the vibrant color flowers.
Maybe.
And,
Yeah.
just like people laying on them and like on the way going, we were just all going up on flowers, color flowers with like beautiful like castle type. Like it was just like clouds and castles and like just beautiful and peaceful. And like everything was vibrant, and it was like I really like, I wish I could draw, because if I could draw that would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And no, it's fascinating because so for me, I've always longed to be able to have dreams that, you know, when you read the prophets or you read these kind of things that are very like psychedelic, that kind of like what you were describing, and you're like, whoa, that would be kind of cool. But I do believe I have had experiences that, and again, it's hard to explain how you know. And I do always believe that you have an experience or you believe something that is of God, that you should test it and you should ask others and you should make sure that it aligns up with things God has said elsewhere, like in the scriptures, and you know. I mean, I've never experienced it in that way. I do believe that God has used like stuff in my dreams, particularly this one dream, to encourage me when I was going through a discouraging time. So in some ways, you could see that as like God was speaking to me through that dream. But it didn't feel like a specific like message, if that makes sense. It wasn't like, okay, you need to know this, but it was more like just a sort of an encouragement. And maybe if I could share one other, let me go to this one too. So if we could share, if you believe God has communicated to you through dreams or more extraordinary ways, what was it like? But also, why do you think God showed up that way to you? And what do you believe God was communicating? And also, does it check out with other things God has said more clearly? And when you think about that, I think the first place to go is the scriptures, right? But also, does it really resonate with Jesus' heart? And I put some resources for people if they want to look at it too. But yeah, for me, I guess that's that one dream I had. I don't really know if it was God exactly telling me something, but I really felt like it was kind of just a general sense of encouragement. But another thing, I mean, it wasn't necessarily through dreams, but you know, just the topic of dreams makes you think about like supernatural things, and like I guess in that description in the beginning, it talked about altered states of consciousness, where things just become heightened, I guess, and you almost like you see what God's trying to show you. But and I don't want to share this often, but like, yeah, I mean, this is actually when I first moved to Philadelphia. I had already started hanging out with some things that One Hope was doing in the neighborhood. I don't know if Jose remembers then, but I actually moved to the house that One Hope used to do our stuff out of there. And but I was kind of depressed, I think partly because I just sort of, it was such a stark change for me from like this other community of people, and then like, I don't know, I knew it was going to be that, but I just like intentionally, like, it's like pulling off a Band-Aid, you know, like you don't feel it, and then like 2 seconds later, you're like, ow, you know? So I think that I had like made a abrupt change in my life. I believe I was following God's calling in my life, but then at that moment I was feeling the ow, you know, like I was really depressed and really, and then it was this, long story short, I basically had this encounter where God saved my life, you know, and I was biking through Hunting Park around this circle, you know, that's going towards Broad Street, towards York Road, and I got, yeah, my life was saved. You know, this drunk driver hit my bike, and actually I do remember I shared about this on that Sunday, and I remember sharing that at that testimonial time, and but the strange thing was I received that moment. It was very clear to me that God was telling me my life has a purpose and I have a calling. And even though it felt like I didn't know what was going on, just keep going. And so that is one of those moments that I always cling on to. There's been other moments where it feels like it was just like that picture of like the thin places, you know, or the veil is being lifted. I think that picture resonates with me, but I feel like that was a moment where God, and I'll say it this way, it almost felt like I was having a dream, if that makes sense, but it felt like more real. And that moment, I guess, fueled me for, well, it's kind of fueled me up until now, you know, in terms of like, I almost feel like when Jacob, the story of Jacob, you know, I imagine probably how often did Jacob think back to his dream, encountering God. And yeah, I think it, for me, that was kind of like what I see as my Jacob's ladder moment. And the thing is, like, it's not that I didn't know God and all these things before, you know, I've had a long history of following God and all these things, but I think I just really, maybe similar to what you're saying, Lynette, but for me, I really, really needed encouragement. I was like very in the dumps. And normal ways of encouraging me probably wouldn't work. Like, hey, here's a Bible passage, or here's like, I needed something more like supernatural. So that's my story for myself. So
I read this testimony today. I get this newsletter from the Christian Community Health Fellowship, which is like related to Christian Community Development Association, of which Esperanza is a part of it. But their last newsletter had a testimony of a healthcare worker in one of our network clinics, somewhere, I don't even know which state, but they were, you know, getting excited to expand their clinic and serve more patients. But then she ended up in the hospital with COVID-19 and really struggling to breathe, but was still able to text from her hospital bed. And she said they gave her a roommate in the hospital who didn't speak English and could only speak Portuguese, but was a believer and started listening to Portuguese worship music. And even though they couldn't communicate, they were praying together, or just as they were both laboring to breathe, praying together. And then a nurse came in and was like, wow, I really feel God's presence here, and then started praying over both of them in Spanish. And then the next shift, this other nurse came in, who was Haitian, and then started praying over them in Creole. And so this woman was just sharing how through worship and prayer, even though she had this disease and this virus, not sure
where her next breath is coming from, feeling that way physically, but really feeling God's care in 4 different languages. And I guess just encouraging people to persevere in this pandemic, and wherever we are, as we remain in prayer, to just trust that God is listening and wanting to move and compelling us to pray. So when you're describing that like thin space, I thought of that story.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of times, like music, because it's not always like with words, there's like melody and different sounds and rhythm, often provides a thin space, especially worship music, where it's oriented towards God, and it's just a different language from what we normally speak, or something about music.
Mm-hmm.
Or just just how it comes together. It's a gift from God to be able to help us experience that interface, or like a portal to God.
Yeah, I have a burden for, I guess, I have a burden to see the body of Christ. We're so diverse, like even the sharing just now, it's all different. And the way God is going to speak to us is going to be very personal to each of us, in ways that really touches us the way he's designed us, So I have a burden for the body of Christ to sort of honor that in each other, that's why I was really interested in talking about this topic, and because I think also Marquise, sometimes I think that if you've seen a gift or a certain way that someone uses something that's abused, we can throw it away altogether. I think Marquise was trying to wrestle with, because we do hear that all the time. Hey, what's up, Pastor? We hear people share about dreams, and like it just kind of like ends up being all these kooky things that people say, and they say that God spoke to them this way. And I was trying to this idea of, can we redeem this aspect of the way that God can and does speak to some people, or just different ways that God does speak to us, without turning that experience itself is like, because another way is that some people can feel like, oh, you're better than me, or you think you're better because you are the person that gets dreams or something like that, and I think that we have that in the scriptures, where we're not supposed to elevate any kind of experience or any kind of thing above others, but we're supposed to honor each other's gifts and other ways of relating to God. But yeah, that for me is really important. And so even though I myself, it's not really particularly something that has been a big part of my relationship with God, like dreams, I did really want to honor that, especially I know Lynette, that was a really powerful time for you, even last year, for that whole week where you're just like, every night you're like, wow, God is speaking to me in a certain way, but yeah, I hope that this can maybe open up, because we're going to be reflecting on these kind of things for a long time, right? But hopefully it can open up conversation and space for like mutual discernment, right? Which is like together listening to the Spirit. Like, is, Lynette shares something that she believes God has spoken. She stands up during a worship, says, I think God is saying this, and then we all discern, does this sound like that's from God? Does that, is that off? Maybe she misinterpreted something. Yeah, and for me, I really want to see that happen. So that's yeah, I hope I have. So, any other thoughts or experiences or anything about anything we've said? Doesn't have to be an experience that you've had, but any thoughts at all before we sort of close out the conversation about dreams and prayer, God?
I don't recall any experiences ever. So I guess my dream life has been very mundane in that regard. Nothing. But just the early verses that you shared had me thinking just along, like, because I think there's so many things about life that we haven't really come to understand. No matter how advanced, a lot of our research and science and everything, but the dream world is still very, the brain itself, but the dream world is still very, like, and it's just a mystery. The fact that we sleep require, really, when you think about it, like about a third of our time has to be in sleep.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm no expert or anything like that, but I know some of the things I've heard over the years, and I think it's pretty agreed upon, is that sleep is mostly not even it's not about physical rest primarily. I mean, probably some a little bit, but I think for the most part, it's all the mind, I guess.
Right. I think
Which
so.
I like, it's not the brain itself that's resting, or that, so it's kind of an interesting thing, to spend anywhere from, like, say 5 to 10 hours, and you're just completely unaware of that time passing, and somehow there's something going on. And I know that I dream. I mean, I've had dreams. I remember them. Generally, a lot of them not very good, and but for the most part, I don't ever remember any of it, and yet I know that they're happening. And I'm sure a lot of you have had those moments where, like, they're very fleeting. Like, you're like, as you're waking up, and they're literally, like, within seconds, they're just going away, and, like, you just lose it. But it was there. I just wonder, like, is God doing something in that? And even if we don't remember it, because I know, like I've heard of all kinds of crazy studies, mostly with animals, but even just with people, that, like, lack of sleep, you pretty much go insane. You get deprived enough sleep, and it just makes you wonder, like, and it doesn't take very long either. You know what I mean? With like, in a short period of time, you get deprived of sleep, you really start to lose it.
Yeah.
And
I think because your brain's supposed to go through the sorting through stuff as you sleep. If you don't get to sleep, your brain can't, like, you can't process life anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, I have too much going on. It's like all coming at me, and I'm just like,
yeah,
I didn't have time to process this,
Yeah. I like the one verse you mentioned, because it was such a funny one, but about the mating of sheep, and such a, like, what is that? But I've heard a lot of stories that I've heard many stories from groups internationally, people from other parts of the world, because that's always an interesting perspective too, to hear, because I think culture plays into it some, or like upbringing. But I've known a lot of people, and I remember Russ Sanderlin, Joe's brother, was one, that he had a lot of dreams that were of the mating of sheep variety. So not specifically sheep, but where we would talk about it, right? So we worked together a lot, just very, like, working on roofs and things like that. And I remember every once in a while, like with a particular dilemma, like, like there's a problem, he would tell, like, I remember one time specifically, we're up on a roof and there was just some issues about how to address some of the problems up there. Uh, and he came the next day and he had a solution, and it was common for him that would come in his dreams when he slept. He would have a solution to something. And I know Tanya's grandfather, I never met him, he passed before I met, but he was a bit of an inventor. He worked for up in Massachusetts, he worked for a company, and this is a while back, so this is the typical where you work for a company 30, 40 years, you retire, and that was the norm. But he worked for a company that he he would develop. They had several patents that were directly associated to his ideas. And from what her Tanya's grandmother told me, he would come up with these inventions. A lot of times they would come to him in his sleep, and he would wake up and start working on it. And when he became a believer later in life. So I don't know if he was having dreams like of that nature before that, but then it was interesting because I know one dream he had, and I don't know that anything ever came of it, was of, I don't know how much time we have, but he developed these like these spray nozzles that literally is for like when they had the printing press kind of thing.
Mhm.
They had to spray it down with water. So he developed this nozzle that sprayed and they would get clogged. So he actually invented a self-cleaning nozzle. And it became like this thing. Yeah, like where it was just like a ball bearing, so forth and so on. But he started having these dreams about bringing water to countries, to people that didn't have water, and where they could irrigate. And it was just wild. I was hearing these stories from, and even his coming to know the Lord was a very vision-like thing where he was very adamantly, like, I think Tanya's grandmother became a Christian. She accepted the Lord, but he was opposed. He was not interested in all. And she was evangelizing, trying to get him to accept the Lord. And no, he had no desire, no interest. And I think I don't know if it was a Catholic priest, and it might have just been a pastor, but I think she would routinely try to get the pastor, and finally was able to, I think, convince her husband to allow him to come over and spend some time with him. And I believe, if I might get some of these details a little bit off, but he was there, and he's making his pitch. He's speaking to him, and he's like, nah, nah. And he had this like a waking kind of dream thing, because he was literally there in a chair. I'm trying to remember some of the details, but he saw someone, I think, behind. I don't know. It was interesting, but it was while he was awake. They were there, and I think they were the pastor and Tanya's grandmother were praying, but he saw someone at the door or something, but they weren't really there, but they were there, and it was some kind of thing, and in that it was some kind of vision, and it was partly what brought him to the Lord. But he was another guy. He would have these dreams of inventions and things that would come to him in the night while he slept. And Tanya has a little bit of that in her. She has a weird story. Ask her sometime about walls that look like Jello blocks. It's yeah. But she's got some of that in her. So I've heard amazing stories, and part of me feels a little bit like not envy, but I'm kind of like I feel this disconnect because I don't have that. So I'm always kind of like, I'm fascinated by it. I mean, I'm partly a skeptic. So I'm always kind of like, well, I want to know what's the purpose of that. Like, explain that to me. You know what I mean? Or like, I want to understand, because I don't have that experience myself to really know it. To understand it.
And on that note, one thing I've heard some people potentially, I don't know, explain. I mean, it's like, it's always also, on the other hand, it's like, do you want to explain something that's like, you want to turn it into a science, but on the other hand, what I have heard some people explain, like, how artist types tend to be very like just different, like very visual, like they sense things that you don't sense, like they have a different way of their brain works, right? And I think that a lot of people have explained it sort of like as prophetic sensibilities and like ways of connecting to God sometimes feels a little bit like artist kind of gifting. Is it's outside of the typical, or like maybe one way of saying it is like, if you have a path, if we have a regular path that we go down, through the woods,
Mhm.
and that's the conventional path, but then the artist finds some like off the beaten path way to get there that's just more, I don't know, direct or something like that. But I think that's what I've heard, like in terms of this kind of modes of God speaking. It's just, it may be outside of the ordinary. Some people, I think they more are drawn towards it just because that's what they're wired like. Some of us, maybe it just be a one-off experience. Some of us, we don't even need that. I read something today that said this guy, actually, I don't know if you remember, Jose Dallas Willard. Remember the Luke used to really like Dallas Willard from our church, but he had said that he believes that God uses vehicles like dreams, and more extraordinary sort of like routes of communicating, when the need that he needs to communicate is a little bit more like extraordinary or urgent or different, so like conventional ways of communicating, you just, you've got the scriptures, you've got common wisdom, you've got friends, you just, like, we go through normal ways of discerning what to do in life or how to make decisions. But and I resonate with that, because like when I've had the really, really, really hard decisions, or like I just feel completely at loss, that's when that moment that I had that more supernatural kind of way of God speaking. And I wonder, yeah, so I resonated with what Dallas Willard said there, about maybe it's more when you're in kind of the crossroads sort of situations, or anyways, I mean, who knows though, right? Like, can we really turn this into a formula? God's not going to be bound by that, but yeah, it's fascinating. And something else you said, Jose, I think I was looking at this again, right? This was right after Lynette and I were talking about maybe this topic. I was looking at it, and you're right, Jose. There's like very early stages when it comes to this science of dreaming.
Yeah.
We know almost next to nothing.
Right.
And Freud did a lot of theorizing, and what's his name? This other guy, the guy that was really that created the Myers-Briggs. Anyways.
Wasn't like Mensch or something with an M, I think.
Yeah, it might be that.
Anyway.
But it's fascinating because like, yeah, it seems to be, like you were saying, across cultures. Seems to be across cultures that dreams are sort of maybe have a mystical quality to them, and not just in ancient times, because it's a fascinating thing, right? Because you could say, like, if someone's an atheist and a Christian says, I think God spoke to me in a dream and I'm really hurt, like, you could see them being like, what?
Yeah. Like,
people believe that back in the day. You still believe that kind of stuff. But it seems strange that it's a practice that has survived thousands of years, that God is been able to use this vehicle to communicate. So anyways, I don't know. I don't think we'll ever take the mystery out of it. But I do also think, I think it's important, of course, to put the guardrails up so that we don't abuse any of these vehicles.
Yeah, like anything.
Yeah. But yeah. Anyways, I'm going to turn this recording off because it's getting long.